recap the fact that as we were talking about Confucianism yesterday, we learned about a man, China's great philosopher, who cares very much about your outward behavior, the material world, the human world, society, and about being righteous, and about implementing those rules that'll give society the proper focus and it'll give everyone their rightful function within that society, everyone their rightful duties within that society, so that society can be balanced, and so that society can be peaceful and it can flow and find its harmony. And for Confucius, it was through those 5 relationships, right? And his focus was those 5 relationships, outward behavior. But you know, it's interesting because in China, historical China, traditional China, in the context of China's great philosophies, there's this other energy, there's this other force that's always been there. And it perhaps even predates Confucius. There's this other softer force. And that force is Daoism. And together, Confucius and Daoism have provided themselves a sort of yin and yang. These different kinds of energies, the patriarchal energy of Confucius and the matriarchal, if you will, softer energy of Daoism. So keep that in mind as I tell you the story about the Taoist farmer. Maybe some of you have heard the story about the Taoist farmer and his horse. Does that kind of ring a bell? The farmer and his horse? Well, once upon a time, the Taoist farmer's horse ran away. And you have to remember, this was a long time ago. And on a farm, a horse is very important because it does all of the things that today tractors would do. You know, horses pull the plows and pull loads from one place to another, and they're very important. So the Taoist farmer's horse ran away. Well, the neighbor got wind of this, and he came over right away, and he came and he said, "Oh, that's too bad, your horse ran away." But the Taoist farmer just shrugged his shoulders. That's not the end of the story. Well, guess what happened the next day? The next day, the horse came back. But it came back with another horsey friend that it met while it was out wandering the hills of China. And guess who got wind of this? The neighbor. So the neighbor came back and he says, "Wow, what good luck! First 1 horse, then no horses, now 2 horses. What good luck!" But guess what the farmer did? Just shrugged his shoulders. That's not it yet. Well, the next day, so we're on the 3rd day now, the farmer's son tried to put a saddle on the new horse. The new horse was kind of wild. And I don't know if any of you have experience with horses, but saddling up a wild horse can be quite an adventure. And the horse wheeled and complained and ended up kicking the son, and the son broke a leg. They had to call the doctor. And the doctor came and set it in a cast and told him to stay off of it for a good 3 months. Guess who came over? So the neighbor, must have been a real yenta neighbor, comes over and says, "Oh, bad luck about your son, broke his leg, I'm sorry to hear that." Expressing his sympathy, and guess what the farmer did? Just shrugged his shoulders. Well, the next day, 4th day now, army officials came by. The army officials were about to put a collar on the son to drag him away to war. Well, it was a great bloody war, a corrupt war. Everybody agreed that it was futile and it was based on greed, and soldiers were coming back dead by the thousands, injured or dead. Injured if they were lucky in this horrible bloody war. They were about to drag the farmer's son off to war when they saw his broken leg, and they said, "Hey, he can't fight like that," and left him and walked away. Guess who came over? The neighbor. So the neighbor came and said, "Wow, your son sure picked a great time to break his leg. What good luck." And the farmer just shrugged. So that's the story. Have you heard that story? You have? Yeah?
Yeah.
What do you get from it?
From a Chinese phrase, you wanted to say that?
I want to know what idea or what teaching comes from the story. What is the moral of the story?
I don't get that.
What's the point of the story? Whatever happens, happens. Kind of like that. Kind of like whatever happens, happens. Shit happens. Yeah. We come to our first Taoist teaching, the teaching of relativity. And here you're going to see, you're really going to see what I was talking about when I said that Zen was the product of what? Buddhism and Daoism. Zen is kind of the baby of Buddhism and Daoism. It's Buddhism having come into China, absorbing and finding fraternity with the native Daoism. And one of those things that they both share, something that's clearly part of both teachings, is this, the idea of relativity. You see, normally we would think of a broken leg as a bad thing. You don't want to break your leg, right? But in this case, was it a bad thing? No, it's certainly better than death, or pretty certain death in a pretty bloody, corrupt war. So in this case, the broken leg turned out to be a good thing. Hence the teaching of relativity that tells us things are good or bad based on their context, how they're seen within the context, and how they're measured up against other things. But it only makes sense when you measure it against something else and within a context. For something only has value once you frame it within a context. Within a frame, things have direction and value. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take this classroom. This is a framed context. Very literally, a framed context. We're inside of this geographical space where there's clearly a west and an east, even a left and a right, and an up and a down, right? But even within this context, left and right is relative to direction, and once we remove this context, it stops having any value at all. I mean, take it to its extreme. Let's imagine ourselves having this class in outer space. We're in outer space, and we have no framed classroom as a context. Now tell me, which way is east and which way is west? Once we're floating around out in space somewhere. It starts to become very strange to give value to the directions, or indeed value to anything. And this is what relativity is all about. For example, frame our society, and now you have certain values showing up. In our society, rich has some value. Somebody is rich based on their earnings, based on their standing, based on their status, their properties, so on and so forth. But in comparison to everyone else within this framed society, because if you go somewhere else in the world, to some very rich country, for example, our rich person might seem very poor by comparison. Or conversely, take the poorest person in our society. That person will seem very rich from the standards of some very poor country. So once you frame the context, you have these values in comparison to other things, in comparison to other things within that society, or in comparison to things outside of that frame even. You see what I'm saying? So we start having values show up. But we're always comparing this value to some other value as a frame of reference. And we can only make sense out of that value within that frame of reference. Like I've said before, if everybody was rich, nobody would be rich. You have to have that frame of reference in order to make the value judgment. And so relativity is just that. It's the teaching that something has value in comparison to something else. What does this have to do with the horse story? Well, like the broken leg. It can be seen as bad, but it can also be seen as good.